Pacific News. Atamarie, ko Susanalaya Tawa tēnei. Research has found the COVID-19 pandemic has worsened labour market disparities between Pacifica workers and their Pākehā counterparts. Auckland University of Technology's Work Research Institute examined ethnic disparities in job entry wages in New Zealand after a period of unemployment, which is known as wage scarring and limited wage progression. The lead researcher, Dr. Alexander Plum, says there was a notable impact on women.
For certain subpopulations, as you mentioned, the women in Auckland, it was getting bigger, this gap. So in the end, this gap was growing.
Alexander Plum says it's difficult to say exactly how the pandemic or perhaps discrimination influenced the ethnic disparities. Samoa's Ministry of Health has reported 75 new positive cases, taking the total number of COVID-19 cases in the community and at the border to 15,318 since the pandemic arrived in Samoa. The ministry does not, however, indicate the total number of active cases. The ministry's report says there are 2 patients currently isolating at Motutua National Hospital, but none are in the intensive care unit. The ministry's recorded 29 COVID-19 related deaths, including a 1-year-old baby girl, recorded as the latest and youngest COVID-19 related death in Samoa. Another 170 COVID-19 cases have been recorded in French Polynesia in the latest 48-hour reporting period. The number of active cases is now 682, continuing the renewed spread of the virus. The pandemic had eased in June and, despite its recent deterioration, is still far weaker than at the outbreak's peak last year. Health authorities say 3 people with COVID-19 are in hospital, 1 of them in intensive care. The death toll from the pandemic is 650 in French Polynesia, with most fatalities registered during last year's outbreak with the Delta variant. The Fijian government's refusal to release its share of funds owed to the University of South Pacific continues to impact on students. Calls from former and current staff and students are growing louder for Prime Minister Frank Bainimarama and Economy Minister Ayed Sayed Kayum to restore almost Fijian $17 million they say it owes to the regional institution. Former USB academic and now a Member of Parliament, Biman Prasad, says Mr. Bainimarama and Mr. Kayum's actions highlight the fracture in the unity of Pacific Islands Forum countries caused by the failure of leadership by the Fijian government. Professor Prasad says no Pacific government since the inception of USP in 1968 has behaved the way the Fijian government is behaving.
Any leader in Fiji right now who has any sense or shame left would immediately restore that grant, because we in this country are the biggest beneficiary of the presence of the University of the South Pacific, not only in terms of the number of students we are sending to the university, but also in terms of the economy around the University of the South Pacific.
Pope Francis has arrived in Canada to offer a formal apology to thousands of Indigenous survivors of abuse inflicted at schools run by the Roman Catholic Church. The BBC's David Lewis has more.
The Pope described the conduct of Roman Catholics who took part as deplorable and asked for God's forgiveness. He said he was sorry from the bottom of his heart. This week, the Pontiff's itinerary includes visits to Alberta and Quebec provinces and the Northern Territory of Nunavut. However, there is no plan to stop off in British Columbia, where the discovery last summer of evidence of some 200 unmarked graves on the grounds of a former residential school led to shock and outrage across the country.
New Caledonia's pro-independence FLNKS movement has signed a memorandum of understanding with the United Liberation Movement for West Papua, which wants independence from Indonesia. The deal was signed by Rosh Wamitang, who is a senior member of the Caledonian Union and holds the presidency of New Caledonia's Congress, and the visiting ULMWP leader Benny Wender. Mr. Wamitang says both territories are involved in a process of decolonisation and emancipation, one with France, the other with Indonesia. The 2 sides pledged support for each other's aspirations. Indonesia took over the western half of New Guinea Island after a controversial 1979 UN-backed referendum, with West Papua now seeking inscription on the UN decolonisation list. New Caledonia is on the UN decolonisation list since 1986, and between 2018 and 2021 has had 3 referendums on independence from France. The Australian parents of a man who was arrested during an anti-China protest in London say their son should be allowed to come home immediately. The ABC's Rebecca Heyman has more. Drew Pavlov's parents and a small group of protesters gathered in Brisbane CBD last night. The 23-year-old is accused of emailing a bomb threat to the Chinese embassy in London. He was arrested while protesting at the embassy on Thursday, but has denied sending the email, saying it came from a fake account. His father, Nicholas Pavlou, says authorities have kept his son's phone and advised him to stay in the country while the investigation continues.
They gave his passport back, but they said that he risked arrest.
Mr. Pavlou has retained legal counsel in the UK. California's worst wildfire so far this year is spreading rapidly, with about 60 square kilometres now ablaze. Thousands have been forced from their homes, and firefighters are struggling to get the blaze under control. Our US correspondent Tom Waite reports the cause is under investigation.
These fires are so devastating because they move so quickly, and there's very little fire protection to do after these infernos just start raging. At this point, there's 10 structures that have been destroyed, so that includes residential, like homes, businesses, and there's been 5 others that have been damaged.
Vanuatu now has a helpline to support children facing abuse. The new child helpline and referral pathway was launched as part of National Children's Day on July 24th. The minister responsible for the Ministry of Justice and Community Services, Zeland Pacific, says children are growing up in a well-connected online world and many become victims of cyberbullying. He also spoke of the abuse that children experience in their homes and communities from people in positions of trust who are supposed to be protecting them. He says these challenges are real and need urgent attention. Mr. Simon asked what can be done to keep children safe at all times. To sport and football, the semi-finals of the Oceania Women's Nations Cup have been decided. On Saturday, James Stewart's hat-trick helped Samoa beat New Caledonia 4-2 in their quarter-final in Suva. On the same day, Papua New Guinea beat Tonga in a penalty shootout after the teams finished 3-all after an engrossing 120 minutes of play. PNG fought back from 2 goals down to force the extra half hour. Yesterday, hosts Fiji booked their place in the last 4 after overcoming a stubborn Cook Islands side thanks to goals in either half from captain Sophie Dialawai and vice-captain Luisa Tamanito Kula. And in the final match, Solomon Islands defeated Tahiti by a single goal from Mary Maifiti. In this weekend's semi-finals, Samoa play PNG and Fiji face off against Solomon Islands. And Fiji has secured a spot, the second Oceania spot for next year's Netball World Cup finals in South Africa. The Pearls defeated the Cook Islands 50-34 in Suva last night to finish behind fellow qualifiers Tonga in the table. It was much closer than the final scoreline suggested, however, with just 1 goal separating the sides at half-time. The Fiji grasped a hold on the match after the break to lead by 11 points at the end of the third quarter, and they extended that in the final period. In the other match, Samoa easily defeated the group's weakest team, Papua New Guinea, 85-32, and they finished third in the group. Athletes competing at the Commonwealth Games beginning in Birmingham this Thursday are being warned by organisers to be cautious of COVID-19 and practice social distancing and mask wearing whenever possible. Commonwealth Games protocols allow athletes testing positive for COVID-19 to compete, but organisers say they will follow the advice of doctors who determine if athletes are too sick to participate. Tuvalu's National Olympic Committee Secretary General Elu Tatawa says his country's 5 athletes have been told to take the threat of COVID seriously.
In this stage with COVID-19, one of the main important things for athletes is to keep healthy because, you know, the dream may be shattered if they don't keep themselves healthy and safe from COVID-19.
When Samoa's teams arrived at the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham, Samoa will be represented in 7 sports at the Commonwealth Games this year: athletics, aquatic swimming, boxing, judo, rugby sevens, weightlifting and wrestling. That's the news and sport from RNZ Pacific. You can listen to and read more of our stories online at rnzi.com. Have been washed away. No electricity, nothing whatsoever.
We need to be prepared for the future.
Pacific prepared.
Pacific prepared.
During this time, before disaster strikes, every natural disaster gets worse.
What happens when something goes wrong, and how do they respond to it?
And make sure everyone's safety comes first. So then, what for doing? You must ready.
Clearing rooms. Restoring critical infrastructure.
Eventually, I know it's going to work. It's only a matter of time.
Helping your community.
Helping your family. Helping you.
Pacific prepared.
Pacific prepared. Pacific prepared.
Hello and welcome to Pacific Prepared, and I'm Fred Hooper. We've got a great team of reporters who are on the ground chatting to you, and the stories that we bring you could help you, your family and your community prepare for natural disasters. The weather and how it affects you is already part of your life. So let's keep talking about being prepared. On today's show, how one province in Papua New Guinea is creating a disaster response plan. We'll hear what effect that will have on disaster responses. It's been a challenging year for Tonga. Our reporter takes a closer look into something that everyone depends on in some way, the agriculture sector, to see how they've coped and how they're planning for natural disasters moving forward. Last week, the national budget was handed down in Fiji, and as part of those announcements, something to fight against coastal erosion in Nadi. That's all coming up. This is Pacific Prepared.
What's your plan? Are you ready to leave your home? Plan now before disaster strikes. Pacific prepared.
I wonder how you feel about living with the possibility that a natural disaster could hit at any time. I'm sure it's challenging, and in most cases probably very stressful. But if you knew there was a plan in place, I wonder if it would make things just a little bit easier for you. One province in Papua New Guinea is trying to put plans in place to make sure that the community is ready if something happens. Pacific Prepared, PNG-based reporter Diane McKenzie has this story.
Situated in the most eastern tip of Papua New Guinea, the maritime province of Milne Bay has become the first to develop a provincial disaster response plan in the country. Milne Bay stands out as the largest maritime province in Papua New Guinea, and the development of its disaster response plan is a step in the right direction. This will now mean that the province will be better equipped to respond to any disaster situation. Pacific Prepared spoke to disaster coordinator for Milne Bay Province, Zeland Pacific, about the recent launch of the provincial disaster plan. He tells Pacific Prepared the Milne Bay Provincial Disaster Risk Management Plan and Standard Operating Procedures, as it is called, was first introduced in 2004. However, it took much longer for the province to finally develop this plan, as he explained.
This plan began in 2004. However, it was shelved and was reopened in around 2008. Maybe, I'm not sure, I'm just assuming, due to funding constraints and also manpower resources, it was shelved yet again and reopened. I joined the administration in 2014.